Hey guys, it is Wingy here and welcome to another episode of Why You Should Watch, which is weird because I don't usually like doing them one after the other, but in this case I'm going to make the exception because I have recently watched the Netflix exclusive series of Transformers: The War for Cybertron Siege. Some of you may or may not know, but growing up I was a huge fan of the Transformers. I still am, really. I still definitely enjoy the Transformers as a franchise. I think the Michael Bay movies I liked as a kid. They're probably not that great now, but I grew up with the likes of Transformers Armada and Energon and like the original G1 cartoon when it was repeated, then eventually Transformers Cybertron, and I just watched a whole load of Transformers related stuff as a kid. And I also had tons of the toys. I had so many Optimus Primes from various different shows. I absolutely loved it and still do, like I say. So when I saw the trailer for Transformers War for Cybertron Siege, it's a trilogy, it's like 3 different parts, but this is only for the first chapter or third. When I saw it, I was surprised at how dark it looked. It didn't look like a kid's series, because I think the Transformers as a franchise typically is aimed more towards kids, but it's also a franchise that you can aim it at an older audience because it can be brutal. You can go further with these Transformers than, you know, just toys fighting each other, do you know what I mean? The tone of it is exactly what you get in the trailers. It isn't this kid-friendly show as such. I mean, it's not got swearing in it, it's not got excessive violence or violence that you wouldn't expect to see in a Transformers thing, but just tonally it's a lot more gritty than usual stuff. Now what I will say from the get-go is the design and the look of this thing is fantastic. Like, the animation itself is brilliant. It's, you know, typical sort of CGI-ish, anime-ish blend animation, but it works really, really well. The characters all look relatively similar to how they would in the original G1 cartoon back in the 80s, so if you like the original design of Optimus and Bumblebee and Megatron and Shockwave and Starscream and all these different characters, then you're gonna get the design for those characters pretty much how you remember them from back in the day. I love especially the fact that usually in these sort of cartoons and stuff, the Transformers themselves are very clean. So Optimus will just be, you know, the vibrant red with his windows and the blue legs, and, you know, Megatron will be white or, you know, a silverish greyish colour, and, you know, he'll be pristine, and Starscream will have his red and his white and his blue and etc. In this you don't get that. Megatron has battle damage, Optimus has battle damage, every single one of them have battle damage and battle scars. You can tell that they're in a war, they're not crystal clean. That is something that I personally haven't seen in a Transformers show yet. I thought that was really unique and quite a clever idea. It's such a simplistic thing, but it really adds to the feel and the vibe. You know, you really get the impression that these Autobots and Decepticons are at war with each other. Now, something that did bother me slightly, thinking about it, it doesn't bother me as much because in the context of the show it makes sense. However, for me, I wasn't too keen on this version of Optimus Prime. Now, I understand that in this series, this is the early days of the war. Optimus is not going to be the Optimus Prime that we know and love, that is just all-knowing, all-wise, knows exactly what to do. He's going to make mistakes. And I get that, and I understand that, you know, he isn't quite there yet. But what I don't like is how this Optimus is very naive. Like, he will literally trust anybody to a point where it's like, you're bound to lose the war if this is how you go about stuff. I understand that you want to be the, you know, the leader for hope and good, and you want to see the best in everybody. At a time, it's got to get to a point where it's like, they might actually kill you behind your back, you know. You're just opening the door to an enemy, essentially. And if it wasn't for prior knowledge of the Transformers, that character could be anybody, literally. It's only because that character who has come in is a well-known Transformers character and also a well-known Autobot that it seems for us okay as the audience that you've let them in. But logic would dictate that that is the wrong fucking thing to do. I also really don't like his voice in this. I don't know who the voice actor is, but for both Optimus and Megatron, it's not Peter Cullen and it's not Frank Welker, which I'm okay with, you know, because I grew up with, like I said before, Transformers Armada, which was Gary Chalk doing the voice, and he's very different to the style of Peter Cullen, which is fine. But the guy who does Optimus in this is trying to sound like Peter Cullen, but he's doing like the stereotype impression that you would hear someone do in a YouTube impressions video, if that makes sense. So for example, in the Transformers movies, right, the Michael Bay ones, at the end you'd hear something like, "My name is Optimus Prime, and I send this message out to the stars." Now that's obviously like an end speech, but in this show, he just talks like that. There's no sort of nuance in his voice. There's no sort of change up in how he talks to people. He will talk to people exactly like that. So he will literally say the most mundane stuff in that sort of epic style, and it doesn't quite work. On my Subway sandwich, I would like tuna toasted with salad. It's just really awkward and a bit distracting, I'm not gonna lie. But the guy who does Megatron, he's perfectly fine. And the voice work overall actually is very, very good. It's just Optimus annoys me. I suppose because I love Optimus as a character, I want Optimus to be the best possible version of Optimus Prime in anything Transformers related, and if he's not, it kind of disappoints me a little bit. You know, his characterization, I understand why he's naive, like I say, but I think sometimes, you know, that voice mixed in with clearly stupid and naive decisions just doesn't quite gel as the Optimus Prime that I know and love. But hopefully in the second and third chapters, hopefully Optimus as a character will improve, fingers crossed. I mean, he's bound to, he's Optimus Prime, but hopefully the voice acting gets a bit better as well, because it was a little bit jarring throughout the entire thing and somewhat distracting. Now in terms of the story itself, it's very typical Transformers stuff. You know, they've got to look for a thing, and the Autobots and the Decepticons, they are fighting over this thing, and if one of them gets their hands on it, then this will happen, but if the Autobots stop the Decepticons doing it, then this won't happen and whatnot. And there's a lot of like typical Transformers stuff in this. So, you know, fan servicey stuff. So the likes of Energon, the Allspark, Space Bridges, the Ark, you know, all sort of stuff like this, which is really good. I like seeing various different amounts of Transformers lore adapted in a new way. I think the thing about this first part, at least, that really struck me from the Autobots' perspective was desperation. You really get a sense of that from them. You see it in the trailers, but the Autobots are basically just decimated. It really feels like it is a tiny little Autobot rebellion against a massive army of Decepticons. It really does feel hopeless for the Autobots. Megatron's a bastard. That's something I'll say. I mean, he always is, you know, because he's Megatron, but in this series, it's weird because he starts off somewhat reasonable. The way that he goes about things, you know, it's like, yeah, okay, I don't necessarily agree with his methods, but I understand where he's coming from. But as the series goes on, Megatron just becomes a megalomaniac, a Megatron-lomaniac. And the interesting thing is the dynamic between Autobot and Decepticon isn't as cut and dry as you might think. There are some Transformers in this series that are neither. There are some that will change sides. I'm not going to say who or which side they're originally on or anything, but it's interesting to see, you know, an Autobot go from that to a Decepticon or vice versa. I'm not going to say which one it is, but there's a few notable characters who do switch sides, and you fully get their reasoning for it. Optimus obviously wouldn't screen them or check them because he's as naive as fuck. I think the cast itself, in terms of which Transformers are prevalent in the series, is a bit disappointing for me, because there are some characters that I wish we would have seen more of, and some characters that I don't really have prior attachment to. And this is just my personal preference, but a character like Ironhide, for example, has always been one of my favourites. He isn't really in this series though. A character like RC, which is another fan favourite and another favourite of mine, she isn't really in this that much. I mean, she is later on, but she doesn't really do much. Soundwave, Starscream to a certain extent, you know, these are Transformers that are iconic and they don't really do that much. There is a cool little arc with Starscream early on, but that just sort of fades off pretty quickly. I do like the different portrayals of certain Autobots and Decepticons in this though, because whilst they're not exactly like the originals or like other versions, I just like the way that they're portrayed in this. You know, a character like Ratchet, for example, I really like what they did with him in this series. There's a Decepticon called Impactor as well. I really enjoyed his character. Jetfire for me was one of the standout characters in the entire show thus far. I think his story arc and his development as a character was awesome. Oh, I forgot to mention, Ultra Magnus. Fucking idiot. Ultra Magnus is probably the biggest dickhead in this entire series, and it annoys me because it's very early on in the series. You know, I said about Optimus Prime being naive and stuff, but Ultra Magnus is just like brain dead stupid. There's something that he does at the beginning of the series where it's like, why would you, what else would you expect? Why would you even do that? I understand that you know, you and yourself are hopeful that things aren't necessarily the way that they seem, and you know, old relationships will still be similar, but you're in the middle of a fucking war, mate. His inevitable story arc in this, you can see it coming from a mile off, and by the end of it, you're like, yeah, fucking God, serves you right. I've never liked Ultra Magnus. I don't know what it is. Even in the original '86 movie, I didn't like him, but Yeah, fuck him. Anyway, overall, this is just a really enjoyable Transformers series. You know, you can still let your kids watch it if you've got them and whatnot, but I would say this is more aimed at teens upwards, and it's also very nostalgia driven for, I imagine, Transformers fans of any age, because you do get like the original designs, essentially. You get to see the early days of the Cybertronian War. You get stuff like, you know, Allsparks and Energon and space bridges and, you know, this sort of stuff. And it's all wrapped up in a nice story as well. It's a really engaging story. It's a really interesting story. A lot of great characterizations in this. Not all of them, unfortunately. But it's only the first third, and I'm very excited to see where the other two are going to go. In the comments below though, guys, let me know if you have seen Transformers War for Cybertron Siege. What did you think of it? Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? Whatever it is, you let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure that you leave a like on it, subscribe for more. Social media and Patreon links will be in the description, as always. So if you'd follow me on any of those things, I would absolutely love you forever. But till next time, guys, you take care of yourselves. Goodbye.